This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
As we get into the second half of July, we'll hear more and more about the upcoming trade deadline. Here are 10 candidates bound to be moved. Well, they won't be. One of them will be. I really do look forward to this period, though. There have been so many great deals over the years. Back in 2008, we at BP did a book called It Ain't Over, and Cliff Corcoran and I ran down this long list of deadline trades to that date, trying to rank them all. Just about, 9 out of 10 deals in baseball history, trades I mean, not deals, we're not acquiring used cars here, turn out to be forgettable guy A for forgettable guy B, and that's all there is to it. And that tends to remain true even at the trading deadline when teams are going for impact, short-term or long-term. And when we did that ranking, we tried to take that into account by saying the team that was trying to arm for the pennant race, that team came out ahead, or the team that was rebuilding came out ahead. Now, it's been 17 years. It's been 17 years. That's hard to believe. And there are some great deadline deals that couldn't make the book. It's possible that we went to print, say, before the Mark Teixeira trade that sent him from the Rangers to the Braves at the July 31st deadline in 2007 for players who were with the Rangers for a long time, particularly the shortstop Elvis Andrus. For example, I haven't checked. I'm not sure if that one is in there. I do know that even though it is not ranked as the greatest deadline deal ever in that chapter of the book, if forced to answer which trade did you guys rank first, I would just always jump to the June 15th, 1964 deal. That was the old deadline that sent pitcher Ernie Broglio, reliever Bobby Shantz, and outfielder Doug Clemens from the St. Louis Cardinals to the Chicago Cubs in return for 2 fringe pitchers and a 25-year-old third-year regular. The Cubs just couldn't figure out an outfielder named Lou Brock. Broglio was unhappy with the Cardinals. The Cardinals, for some reason, manager Johnny Keane was unhappy with him, and the Cubs were unhappy with Brock. Each side's reaction to the trade sounds backwards from what we would expect it to be, given the benefit of hindsight. The Cubs sound like they're doing cartwheels, whereas Cardinals general manager Bing Devine, I almost said Andy Devine, who used to show up in a lot of old westerns, kind of a heavyset guy with a hoarse voice. Bing Devine doesn't sound overwhelmed. He sounds, frankly, whelmed. Cubs manager Bob Kennedy said, "This gives us as good a pitching staff as there is in the league." Brock, reported the Chicago Tribune, had fallen into some disfavor with Kennedy, a stickler for sound application of baseball's fundamentals. But, possessed of tremendous speed, Brock could prove to be a sound investment for the Cardinals. Good call, Chicago Tribune. Kennedy was irritated at times by Brock's erratic outfield play and occasionally by his unsound base running. That's another note that sounds ironic, given that the fellow retired with the all-time stolen base record. That said, at the moment, Brock was thinking of himself as more of a slugger, and it wasn't totally crazy. He could hit home runs, at least before the Cardinals moved out of Sportsman's Park and into the circular ashtray version of Busch Stadium. But it's not surprising he wasn't sure who he was, because the Cubs were such a mess at the time. They signed Brock out of college in August 1960 and had him in the majors the following September. They had limited his minor league work to just 128 games, but they were also frustrated that he wasn't a finished product. Brock double dribbles everything hit his way, Gene Mauch said, and he wasn't even Brock's manager at the time, or ever, like Brock needed an extra chef in the kitchen. The Cubs had had 6 managers in his 3.5 years with the team. When he got to St. Louis, Johnny Keane simplified things, told Brock, swing away when you feel like it, and then, once you get on base, run. And it worked out pretty well for them, wouldn't you say? Your Honor, I submit nearly 3,000 hits, 900 stolen bases, and 3 pennants as evidence. I rest my case. In 327 games with the Cubs, Brock had hit .257 with a .306 on-base percentage, a .383 slugging percentage, and 50 steals. And that's about what he was hitting at the moment of the trade as well. When he got to St. Louis, boom, he exploded, hitting .348, .387, .527 with 33 steals the rest of the way. Now, there have been some traded hitters who hit that well or even better, but only so many whose club was 28-31 at the moment they were traded, then went 65-38 the rest of the way, in part because they were so galvanized by the acquired player, overtook the leader in the pennant race, and went on to win the World Series. In a column written in reaction to the Brock Broglio deal, St. Louis Post-Dispatch writer Neil Russo asked, why didn't the Cardinals get more than Brock, a flashy outfielder who could become a star, for Broglio, an 18-game winner last season and still regarded as a top pitcher? Good question. Broglio was 28 years old. Back in 1960, he had gone 21-9 with a .274 ERA, and had finished 3rd in the Cy Young voting. By WAR, he should have won it, but that wasn't a thing then, and the Pirates had won the pennant anyway, and so it went to Vern Law. After an off year in 1961, he pitched quite well again in 1962, and, as Russo mentioned, went 18-8 with a .299 ERA in 1963, although he was worse relative to the league in terms of runs allowed. When the Cardinals traded him, he was 3-5 with a .350 ERA, which was fine, unexciting. Heck, he had been the opening day starter. They couldn't have known he had 7 wins and 19 losses left to go in his career. The Cubs, should they have known it? They didn't, although they might have noticed that year by year his strikeout rate had declined. It was 7.5 per 9 in 1960, 4th in the league by 1963. He was down to 5.2, which ranked 23rd. When traded, he was at 4.7. His elbow was starting to go, and that August, well, it went. It happens. When Brock arrived in St. Louis, the corresponding move was for the Cardinals to send down rookie outfielder Johnny Lewis. Lewis was hitting only .234 with a .324 on base and a .362 slugging percentage at the time, but he had hit .280 with a .372 on base and a .445 slugging in the International League the year before, and was regarded as a prospect. He probably wasn't that different from Brock in a sense. He had speed but less and pop but a bit more. Devine said he hadn't given up on Lewis. In fact, I feel Lewis probably has more potential than Brock. He fields better and he throws better. Well, Brock never could throw, but nevertheless, by December, Devine had indeed given up on Lewis, trading him to the Mets for Elio Chacon and Tracy Stollard. Lewis had a decent year for the Mets in 1965 by the standards of Shea Stadium during Beatlemania, then totally lost the ability to hit at the age of 26, and his major league career ended quickly. I don't think the Brock Broglio kind of trade is possible now. Everyone has so much more information, everyone knows better, and they check the medicals too. So you can't be pleasantly surprised, you can only be disappointed. Hasn't the Rafael Devers deal been like that for the Giants so far? Isn't life like that now for everyone else? Release the files, they say, but no matter what's in them, they won't be happy. Oh, have we changed subjects? I say not really. It's simply the way that just about everything goes here in the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show. Not for the first time will I tell you that I usually let the theme song play out and kind of psych myself into position to start this segment of the show, and then, as I begin my song and dance, I realize that the record button was not armed. Therefore, I was all excited to talk to myself. But to paraphrase a now disgraced comedian, hey, it's a conversation with someone I love. How are you? I am Stephen Goldman. This is The Infinite Inning, episode 339, in an ongoing series that will probably culminate in a huge anniversary issue around number 500, I would think. Some big crossover with our doppelgangers from an alternative reality, no doubt, and it will disappoint. I mean, writing is hard. I was just watching the first episode of the new season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and I was impressed because something like 17 years ago, when the previous season aired, they left off on a cliffhanger, and they resume with the cast in dire straits, and they quickly throw out all the usual cheat codes that they use traditionally in Star Trek. Not so much the original series, I think, but particularly in the Next Generation era shows where they write themselves into a corner and then they cheat their way out. And if you've seen enough of them, you have experienced what I'm talking about. Captain, this means certain death for the ship and the crew. We're trapped in the arms of the Gabunthar destroyer, and physics insists that there's no way out. But wait, no one has ever thought about channeling the food processors through the deflector drive. That ought to create a harmonic disruption that will launch us free. And they do it, and the credits roll, and we all get to count our money, I guess. So in this one, they start out in a trap, and they throw out all of those kinds of boilerplatey kind of ideas, and they reject them one by one. And I thought, they're talking to me. They understand that my expectations are frequently, well, they're met, but my expectations are set very low. And they say, no, we're not going to do those things. And then the episode rolls on for another 40 minutes, and then they do exactly that. Again, I don't begrudge any writer anything. It's hard, and I know that from experience, not just because of how long it can take me sometimes to find my way in and out of a fairly simple baseball essay, but because I have written novels, I have written short stories, and traps are hard. And by traps, I don't necessarily mean a literal trap like the pit and the pendulum or James Bond on the laser table with Goldfinger saying, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." But really any situation in which you've chased your character up a tree and now you have to get them out again, and you want to get them out in the most original way possible. In real life, though, a fella belted to the laser table by Auric Goldfinger, he's not getting out. He's just going to be split by that laser. And so, of course, the temptation is to say, well, you didn't know this. But James Bond always pockets a laser table belt cutter in his rectum before he goes out on a mission. And yeah, it hurts, but that's why he's 007. If you read the Stephen King novel Misery, I don't remember if this is played up quite as much in the film version that Kathy Bates won the Oscar for playing the deranged fan Annie. But part of what makes her crazy is she can't accept that. And she talks about watching old movie serials like The Perils of Pauline, and that you go away one Saturday with the wagon that Pauline is on being pitched off of a cliff with her in it, and she's just dead, okay? But you come back the next week and you find out, no, she had jumped out just in the nick of time. We forgot to show it to you. That makes her murderous with rage, but I think part of King's point is you do it. You fix that. You make an exciting story that has a realistic resolution. I'm not saying it can't be done. I am saying it's probably pretty hard to do in episodic television, even when shows are down to 6 or 10 episodes a year, just as it was hard to do in those old serialized shorts days. Some of them weren't bad either. You just have to fix your expectations appropriately. I think my problem with Star Trek first now is that Paramount's corporate owners don't respect the viewers. And of course, their corporate overlords don't respect the viewers or the people in general, given the way they've been trending with CBS News and Colbert and so on, and I look forward to deleting that app. My problem with these specific writers is that they set out at the beginning of the episode to say, we are going to thwart your expectations. We are going to throw a change up, which is what good writing does. Again, not underrating how difficult that is, and then they do exactly what they said they weren't going to do. Another deus ex machina. Here's a baseball thing that I came across earlier that thwarted my expectations in a good way because the underdog subverted the overdogs who, in this instance, happen to be racist. In a few minutes, I'm going to mention an out-of-print book of photographs of the Negro Leagues. And when picking up that book this week to refer to for the story we're going to get to in the second act, I kept opening it to the same damn disturbing page. It's of a roadside sign in Oklahoma for some sort of restaurant, not a chain or anything, and advertising pie. You should stop off and try the pie. And I'm not going to enunciate the word. It's spelled out in the sign, but N-word chicken. And about the first 3 times that I opened to that page, I quickly flipped away from it as if I had accidentally revealed some sort of pornography in the book. But when I looked at it, I realized that it had been taken, the picture had been taken by and with some Negro Leaguers who were standing under the sign and pointing at it and laughing at it. And maybe they're saying, do you know what kind of chicken that is? Because I've never heard of that kind of chicken. Does it have some sort of special feathers before they pluck it? Are they referring to who the chicken is for, who it's made by, or the nature of the chicken itself? It's so absurd that one would resort to denigrating a people or a chicken in order to sell some of it. And simultaneously, it's a bit scary and a lot instructive to try to visualize, and maybe this is what they were laughing at too, the kind of person who would be receptive to that sort of come on and would say, oh boy, and chicken. You're appealing to someone's very low, very lurid sense of authenticity there. As I said at the outset of the show, you can't be surprised. You can only be disappointed. And so that's why it feels so good to see that, 90 years ago or so, or whenever that photograph was taken, that they decided to be amused rather than disgusted, to invert the Elvis Costello phrasing from The Angels Want to Wear My Red Shoes. Because what else can you do? You still can and should fight against ignorance wherever it appears. And you should certainly fight for your own dignity. But maybe the first step is just not letting them get you down with stupid stuff. Like writing your way out of a corner, it's another thing that's easier said than done, but we can all aspire to it. Real briefly, if you were looking for this week's reissue episode, I did not manage to get it out. I was tied up with doctor stuff. I'm good. There's some maintenance coming up, and I needed to prepare for that. We'll get her going again next Wednesday. And I'll tell you about what I wrote at Baseball Prospectus this week in our next segment, because our second story takes off from there. And so I pray you allow us this break, and on the other side of it, we will visit with the Los Angeles White Sox. Yeah, there really was such an animal way back when. And it was kind of important, too. So, hey, if you're listening at home, sit comfortably through this brief pause. If you're driving, keep your eyes fixed on the road. We'll be back in a second. And if you're belted to a table with a laser aimed at your crotch, well, I hope you thought ahead, the way that James Bond did. But I understand it if you didn't.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
I'm not sure this story has a real plot line. Maybe it's just a set of facts, but the main team in question had a player whose last name was Foots and whose nickname was Sore. So how bad could it be? Mainly, I wanted to share my excitement at finding a new area of baseball history, just a little islet in the mainstream that I hadn't known very much at all about prior to this week. I love learning about things I didn't know, and I don't know if this will come out quite in English, but I especially love it when I didn't know that I didn't know them. I mean, what I don't know about, let's say, opera could fill many shelves of a large library. But okay, I've kind of intentionally neglected that, despite the fact that my late dad really loved opera and would have liked it if I loved it too. Not that I hate it or actively dislike it, it's just sort of not a main thing for me. And so that's something where I know that I don't know it. I also know I don't know differential calculus or how to safely clean a blowfish. The amount of stuff that I know I don't know is rather huge. But when it comes to baseball history, I don't flatter myself to think I know it all. And in fact, in every individual subject area within baseball, I know there are people who have devoted themselves to it and thus would know more about that micro specialty, say the game in 1850 and the kinds of New York City clerks who were playing it for the Knickerbocker Club, that sort of thing. I have a generalist knowledge of that. And if pressed, I can tell you that Alexander Joy Cartwright wrote down the rules, but I can't tell you who played third base in 1855. No, that I cannot do. That's another place where I know what I don't know, but this, what I'm about to tell you about, is an area where I just didn't know that I didn't know it. I didn't know it was there. So it began when I wrote my column at Baseball Prospectus this week about Joe DiMaggio's dad, Joe Sr., and how he was classified as an enemy alien after Pearl Harbor, despite having lived here for over 40 years at that point. I don't think Jr. was part of Jolton Joe's birth name, by the way, but he was his dad's namesake, just Americanized. They both were. Joe Sr. was born in Sicily as Giuseppe. He came here in 1898, got established as a fisherman, and sent for his wife and his only child to that point, a daughter. The rest of his total 9 kids would be born here in the United States, in California. You know, Queen Victoria had 9 children as well. I would say that Joe's kids accomplished more in life than hers ever did, despite starting from a much higher place in society. But putting that aside, I feel for both her and Rosalie, the Yankee Clippers' mom. If you look at when Queen Victoria had her kid, she had the first 6 over 9 years, 1840 to 1848. Given that biologically, pregnancy lasts about 40 weeks from fertilization till birth, she was pregnant about 50% of the time in those years. That's hard on a body. Rosalie, Giuseppe's wife, had 5 kids in 7 years after their separation ended, so she was, shall we say, occupied for an even higher proportion of the time during those years. They both had pretty decent lifespans, despite all that, pardon the expression, labor. So they were both pretty lucky. I mean, childbirth mortality back in, well, certainly Victoria's day, but even in Rosalie's, was much higher than it is now. Although we're working on it, we could get back there with a little more practice. Giuseppe had done a lot of things right as an American citizen, providing for his large family, but somehow he had neglected to get his citizenship papers over those 40-plus years of residing in the San Francisco area. So after Pearl Harbor, and Japanese, German, and Italian Americans came under suspicion of having compromised loyalty, he, at 70 years of age, was considered a potential spy and restricted in his movements. In no sense do I think they were looking at senior citizen, non-naturalized Italians, whose sons happened to be spectacularly famous, among the biggest celebrities in the country. It was just that they had a broadly written rule and a number of areas which they had classified as sensitive for national defense, including the coastal areas off of San Francisco, and specifically Fisherman's Wharf, which is roughly where the DiMaggio family lived, where they had a restaurant, and where the DiMaggio boat tied up. And so not just for Giuseppe, but for a lot of Italian-American fishermen in that area, they just made it so it would have been better for them to stay home and not make their living. This lasted for Italians not quite a year. Unlike Japanese Americans and their citizen children, they weren't interned in prison camps, and that confinement didn't last for the duration of the war. The restrictions on Italians were quietly dropped in November 1942, and there wasn't much in the way of pushback. Whereas letting out the naturalized Japanese citizens and their children who had citizenship by birthright, that didn't happen until the end of the war. As is often the case when you set out to tell a story, you learn things that aren't necessarily on the trunk of your tale, but are fascinating in themselves. In this instance, the further I went into the disparate treatment of quote-unquote enemy aliens, white versus Asian, the more I ran into baseball. Specifically, who was interned. Among the many, which included Americans from just about every walk of life, was Kenichi Zenimura. So who is Zenimura? He was an immigrant from Hiroshima who went with his family to Hawaii when he was 7 years old and then, as a young adult, moved to Fresno, California. What did he do in Fresno? He played and promoted baseball. When he died in 1968, the Fresno Bee called him the Dean of Nisei Baseball in America. He was the captain of his high school baseball team, won a state championship in Hawaii, and in Fresno, he organized the Fresno Japanese baseball team and played shortstop, although he spotted at just about every position. And by the way, he would have made Jose Altuve look statuesque because he was only 5 feet tall, although everyone was a bit shorter back then. He did several things to spread the love of the game among the Japanese community, both back in the home islands of Japan and in California. First of all, he used players from his Fresno team to seed Japanese clubs throughout California. And secondly, he made regular barnstorming trips back to Japan. Even in those internment camps during the war, he organized ball clubs, which helped the internees get through it, or I should say, play through it. When you learn about Zenny, as he was called, you also learn that the Fresno team barnstormed throughout California, which meant that winters, they went down to Los Angeles and played the White Sox, aka the Philadelphia Royal Giants, or just the Royal Giants, but also sometimes the New York Black Yankees. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but bear with me, all will become clear in just a moment. Now, as you know, with the notable exception of the National League New York Giants, or later San Francisco Giants, the name Giants was a signifier of a black baseball team. And that is true in this instance during the segregation period. We're talking about the 1910s and 1920s. At that time, the form that the California Winter League took was of a 4-team circuit with 3 white teams and 1 all-black team, with a notable exception, which we'll get to in a second. This was, in a way, very pioneering in the sense that it was not integrated on an individual team basis, but the league itself was integrated, featuring play between white and black players. The team was managed and I think owned by a fellow named Lonnie Goodwin, also a black player out of Texas, who had come up with Rube Foster back earlier in the century. The Philadelphia Royal Giants were a team that was part of the Eastern Colored League, and since black players generally didn't make enough money that they could just take winters off and tried as best they could to play year-round, I think what happened was that whereas the intention was to call the one black team in the league the Los Angeles White Sox, in practical terms, most of the Royal Giants roster just decamped from Philadelphia to California, and it was just easier to say, hey, it's us. We're the Philadelphia Royal Giants. And that scenario tended to repeat itself. One year, they had a disproportionate number of New York Black Yankees, and it just seemed easier to say, look, it's the Black Yankees. It's not the Royal Giants. It's not the White Sox. We're the Black Yankees. One year, pretty much the entire Kansas City Monarchs team came over. Again, it's not like a regular club with a reserve clause, where if you were following the Cubs in that time and they had Riggs Stevenson in year 1, unless they went out of their way to trade him, you knew he was going to be back in year 2. In this instance, it was whoever showed up. They didn't change the name to Monarchs that year, though. In terms of uniforms, I think they just wore whatever. So there are photos of some of their rosters, and you see that Lonnie Goodwin has a uniform with an RG logo on the breast, although it looks like RC to me, so I keep thinking of the cola. When was the last time you had an RC cola? I don't really drink leaded soda anymore because it made me a jerk, frankly. I'd get wired on the sugar and the caffeine and then crash off of it, and by the end of the evening be super depressed. And we haven't even talked about the calories or other deleterious effects on your health. So I swore that stuff off pretty much a long time ago. But I think for RC specifically, I might have last had one about 1981. I don't know if I've even seen one since then. All I remember, you can correct me on this, is that back then it seemed about half as sweet as, say, a Coke or a Pepsi, and so I would have described it as unpleasantly dry. I've known people I would describe that way too, and now that I think about it, I don't really miss either of them. Only a few players got those RG or RC uniforms, Royal Cards, and some had uniforms that just said Giants on them, and others might have just brought their uniform over from their regular season home, like the Hilldale Club. There's a reason they say you can't tell the players without a scorecard. By the way, the league's 3 non-black teams had awful names like White Kings or White Stars. It's depressing. And yet, given the great players that were on the Royal Giants rosters, they won a lot. They won the championship a lot over the years. As former Major League utility man turned Los Angeles Angel Red Killefer said in 1926, every member of the Giants could make good in the big leagues if the color line permitted. This seems obvious now when you look at who passed through that Royal Giants team and see a huge number of players who were later inducted into the Hall of Fame. Turkey Stearns, Mule Suttles, Devil Wells, Satchel Paige. But you weren't allowed to prove that point then. How can you say there was never any systemic racism in the United States when white players were making comments like that 99 years ago? We'll get back to that in just a second. We'll also tie all this together with Kenichi Zenemura's Fresno team right after this brief intermission.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
At least once, the Royal Giants had a team that was integrated not in the black and white sense, but in the black and Japanese sense. They had a Japanese second baseman. I haven't yet found that player's name. I'd like to think that it was Zenemura himself, but it seems pretty likely he was exclusively tied up with his Fresno club. However, both threads came together in Japan in early 1927. That year, after the Winter League season concluded, both clubs, separately, I think the trips were more or less coincidental, went on a Pacific tour, visiting, in the Giants' case, Japan, China, Korea, the Philippines, and Hawaii. Probably not in that order, but maybe. This tour was a problem for both the Eastern Colored League and the Negro National League, because it left in March and didn't return until June, which meant that several of their key players weren't around for about half the season. The league said that they were going to issue 5-year suspensions to catcher Biz Mackey, a member of the Hilldale Club and a future Hall of Famer, Detroit Stars lefty Andy Cooper, who also eventually received a plaque, Harrisburg Giants slugging outfielder Rap Dixon, and Monarchs catcher Frank Duncan. But like a lot of Negro League's attempts at discipline or enforcing contracts, it was mostly bluster. Lonnie Goodwin's argument? He paid better. As much as any of Babe Ruth's trips overseas, which came later, and Goodwin's gang had gone back by then, Zenemura's too, the Royal Giants tour was key to the establishment of the game in Japan. I mean, it was already there. It was already going. They already had huge stadiums. Japanese teams were playing in 100,000-seat venues, which would have been intimidating as hell to say the St. Louis Browns if they had gone over then when they were playing before 19 fans, one of whom was the shortstop's mom, plus a dog named Clarence, who just happened to sneak in under the turnstiles and no one had the heart to chase him out. What I mean is that the Negro Leagues players, impressed with their abilities and their comportment, They went 23-0-1, the one tie being against the best semi-pro team in Japan's Industrial League, and what they, plus Ruth, plus Lefty O'Doul, and so on over the years, including Zenemura's Fresno team, and he and Goodwin arranged for their clubs to play each other on this early 1927 tour. What they showed was that Japanese baseball belonged to this greater community of the game, and that they could aspire to a higher level of competition that they might not have achieved had they just been left to their own devices. They could have just said, hey, this is the way we do it. And certainly, in some aspects, they did do that. They should have done that, and they continue to do that. But I think it's a big thing to be reminded that one is or could be part of something larger than themselves. And though we may be separated by language or mode of dress or the way that we play the game, there is common ground here. And what leaders may do or may have done in the years after that, well, the average person who aspires to leadership is in some sense crazy. By placing themselves above the community, they exempt themselves or remove themselves from the community. Whereas the good, healthy, average center of the community is not interested in war. It is not interested in conquest, annihilation, genocide. It just wants to enjoy its life, its family, its children, to see them grow up and carry on the family business, which is the business of life. The one life that we've been given, and perhaps along the way, all the aforementioned members of the community might pick up or watch someone pick up a bat, a ball, and a glove. And that can be a metaphor for anything you like. But in the case of the infinite inning, it is simply what it appears to be, the game of baseball. But for one book from earlier this century, much of this history, especially as it pertains to the black players, has been forgotten. This whole benign exchanging of culture through baseball. It's grand, and it shows what you can accomplish in terms of bringing people together when your thinking extends beyond the barrel of a gun. And then there's America. I found this story in a wonderful book. I referred to it earlier. It has the anodyne but accurate title of The Negro Baseball Leagues, A Photographic History. It came out way back in 1992. It is credited to Phil Dixon with Patrick J. Hannigan. Oddly, the copyrights are by some people named Jed and Joanna, but I suppose that's none of my business. In that book, they have a photo of the 1929 Royal Giants team. I referred to it earlier, and that picture includes outfielder L.D. Livingston of the Monarchs, also known as Lee, Leo, and Goo-Goo. Maybe they said it just like that, Goo-Goo, oh Goo-Goo. In 1929, the Monarchs went down to Houston to play the Black Buffaloes of the Texas Colored League in a postseason series. Now, there was also a White Texas League, and it had a Houston Plain Buffaloes team, vanilla Buffaloes, pale Buffaloes that don't go out in the sun Buffaloes. That's not who the Monarchs were in town to play, given that, as we've observed earlier, they weren't allowed to play them. No, they were playing another segregated team, the Black Buffaloes, who apparently, as this story will reveal, had a following among white police officers in Dallas. Go figure. Now, LD went with the rest of his Monarchs teammates to play in this series, and he was born and died in Fort Worth, so none of what happened to him should have been particularly surprising. After one of the games, a game won by the Monarchs, Livingston went to see relatives in Dallas and was arrested by 2 white cops for the crime of waiting for a cab while black. Livingston identified himself as a Monarchs ball player. "You're one of them northern boys who beat the Houston club in that series," the now enlightened cop said. Livingston was nevertheless taken to jail and given a $20 fine. "On what charge?" he asked. The only reply was, "Hell, boy, you're in Texas." Need I say more? The more things change, the more things stay the same. It's just that every once in a while we change up the costuming so that the play is staged in modern dress. L.D. Livingston, good old Goo-Goo, he was out $20, a lot of money back then. But I suppose in that one instance, he had it a little better than, say, Kenichi Zenemura had it once the Zeros flew over Hickam and Wheeler fields. Sure, those cops were trying to keep him down, but they weren't trying to keep him out. Casey Stengel, who helped discover some of the players who made up the first generation of Monarchs, played some in the California Winter League. In one game, he had a couple of hits off of Bullet Rogan. Casey was a good player. Should you wish to be good about following me on social media, you can do so at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me again, at infiniteinning@gmail.com, and there's a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, bang, you're there. But would you want to be? Day by day, we grow closer to replacing that, I swear. As always, this show is brought to you by our sponsors and our Patreon supporters, and on that note, I would like to thank Chris, Thomas, and Jerry. Thank you so much, fellas. If you'd like to join them, please visit patreon.com/The Infinite Inning. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, oh, go sue someone for absolutely no reason. It's all the rage nowadays, but don't do it in California. They have statutes against that. Our theme song, which you're hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring. We wrote the dang thing, and I'm proud of it. Conversely, Dr. Rick explains that I saw snakes, big snakes and little snakes, snakes of all colors, who chanted at me during my long night's vigil, and I have climbed this granite wall, and I'm not coming down until they are gone. Well, I guess the same goes for me, because who would leave a friend in that condition? And so, assuming we do get down, I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.